Welcome to The Explainer. So, let me ask you, are you worried about this? I mean, how are we going to feed everyone on a planet that's getting warmer? It feels like this huge, overwhelming problem, right? But what if I told you the answers aren't all about some futuristic sci-fi tech? What if they're actually buried deep in our past, just waiting for us to dig them up? So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to quickly break down what's not working with our current food system. Then, the really cool part, we'll jump back in time to check out two amazing ancient solutions. After that, we'll see how they stack up against our modern methods, and we'll wrap up by looking at how this old school genius is making a comeback today. All right, section 1. To really appreciate the old ways, we first have to get real about the new ones. Look, there's no denying modern farming has fed a lot of people, but it's come at a price. And that foundation, well, it's starting to show some serious cracks. Think about it. Our industrial food system is, well, it's a beast, but it's a very hungry beast. We're talking up to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's draining our first water sources, it's totally hooked on fossil fuels, and here's the kicker, it's often destroying the topsoil we need to grow anything at all. The energy we put in versus the food we get out, the ratio is not great. So, as the climate gets wilder, a system this fragile starts to look pretty risky. Okay, enough doom and gloom, let's get to the good stuff. For our first mind-blowing solution, we're heading to the Valley of Mexico to see how an ancient civilization built an agricultural powerhouse, literally in the middle of a lake. And here it is, the Chinampa. You might have heard them called floating gardens, which sounds magical, right? But they weren't actually floating. They were something even cooler, brilliantly engineered artificial islands. We're talking about a system that goes way back, creating some of the most fertile soil you could ever imagine, all built right on top of a shallow lake. So how did they do it? It's genius in its simplicity. First, they'd weave these fences out of willow trees right in the lake bed. Then, they'd dredge up all that rich mud from the bottom of the lake, layer it with plants, and pile it inside the fence. They'd plant trees along the edges to hold it all together. The best part? The canals between these islands provided a constant supply of water, wicking up from below to keep the crops perfectly irrigated. It's a closed-loop system. It builds its own soil and waters itself. This is the definition of working with nature. And the result of all this brilliant engineering? You're not going to believe it. 7 harvests a year. How? While one crop was still growing, they were already starting the next batch of seedlings in little cubes of that rich canal mud. This created a non-stop food factory that fed the massive city of Tenochtitlan. And if you need proof of just how powerful this system is, check this out. Fast forward to the 1950s. These ancient-style Chinampas were still outproducing the average American farm in maize yield. I'm talking more than double. And the U.S. farms were using all the modern tech, tractors, synthetic fertilizers, the whole 9 yards. Incredible. Okay, so from the lakes of Mexico, let's journey south, and way up into the Andes Mountains. This is one of the toughest places on Earth to farm, but pre-Incan societies came up with some completely different but equally brilliant solutions. Up on the high plains, the Altiplano, they created something called the Waru Waru. At first glance, it looks simple, just raised mounds of earth with water channels in between. But don't let that fool you. This is a 3,000-year-old masterpiece of climate engineering. So, here's the secret sauce. Those water channels, they're like a giant thermal battery. All day long, the water soaks up the sun's heat. Then, when the temperature plummets at night, and I mean plummets, it gets freezing up there, the water radiates that stored heat back out, wrapping the crops in a protective warm blanket and saving them from frost. And does it work? Oh yeah, it works. People rebuilding these Waru Waru fields today are getting more than 8 tons of potatoes per hectare. That absolutely crushes the yields from conventional fields right next door, which are only getting 2 or 3 tons. But wait, there's more. You can't talk about farming in the Andes without talking about the terraces, the andenes. And these aren't just, a few steps carved into a hill. No. These are massive, complex engineering projects that turned impossibly steep mountainsides into green, productive farmland. Just look at these numbers. We're seeing yield increases of anywhere from 43 to 65% from major crops like potatoes, maize, and barley. Why? Because the terraces stop soil erosion cold. They manage water perfectly, and they create these amazing microclimates. They literally made the mountainsides farmable. Okay, let's take a step back. We've seen the Chinampas, we've seen the Waru and the terraces. So what's the big takeaway here? What's the fundamental difference between how they thought about farming and how we do it today? It really comes down to this, a tale of two completely different approaches. Our modern system is all about simplification. You grow one crop, a monoculture, and you pump in fossil fuels and synthetic fertilizers from the outside. The ancient systems? They did the exact opposite. They embraced complexity, polycultures, nutrient cycling. They worked with what they had, regenerating the soil and water locally. One system tries to conquer nature, the other partnered with it. And this quote just nails it. We have this idea of primitive farming, but that's just wrong. These systems were incredibly sophisticated. They were creative, successful strategies that showed the genius of indigenous farmers who figured out how to build up their environment, not tear it down. All right, so this is all really cool history, but here's the big question. Can we actually use any of this stuff today, or is it just a museum piece? The answer is a huge, emphatic yes. These aren't relics, they're blueprints for the future. And you know what? The revival is already underway. Right now, farmers in Peru are rebuilding those waru fields. In Mexico, there's a special label you can look for that guarantees your food came from a sustainable chinampa. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization has even recognized Andean agriculture as a global heritage system. Heck, even urban farms in places like Baltimore are taking inspiration from the Chinampa design. This is happening. And let's be clear, this isn't about throwing away everything we've learned. The real magic happens when we combine the best of both worlds. Imagine taking that incredible hydraulic engineering from the Incas and pairing it with modern soil moisture sensors. Or taking the biological engine of the Chinampa and boosting it with modern water filtration and microbiology. That's a powerful combination. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. We're always looking for the next big invention to solve our problems. But what if our future food security doesn't depend on inventing something new? What if it depends on rediscovering the genius of our own past?